Today we're going to go over the introduction and discussion sections of your lab report. So the introduction, of course, scholars, one thing, it's not posted above, but it goes for all labs, and we know this at this point. Every single section except the materials and methods have to be written in what kind of format? Answers to questions or paragraph format? Paragraph format, okay? So remember, I won't grade unless I see paragraphs. Now, introduction section, okay? Remember, we have to have headers, titles for all of our sections. We write introduction out, and then we write our paragraph. So, introduction, what is specific heat? So I'm just going to go through this because I want to be under 15 minutes for the video, otherwise I have to upload 2 separate files and that's a mess. So, what is specific heat? When we think about what specific heat is, we need to think about the units for specific heat. So, the specific heat for water, say, and I write CH2O subscript, well that's 1.0 cal per gram degrees Celsius, alright? So what we're looking at is the amount of energy required to raise a gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius, okay? So that's what specific heat is. It's the amount of energy that's required to raise the gram of a substance, to raise 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. So that's what I would be typing right now, right? You can be completing your lab report right now and just getting this done, okay? So specific heat, again, is the amount of energy required to raise a gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius, okay? That's how we define specific heat. You could be a little more general than that. You could say it's the amount of energy needed to raise some amount of mass of a substance by some particular temperature. It is true that these units are arbitrary, but thinking of them specifically is a good idea because this is just how chemists tend to define specific heat. One note, we can use joules instead of calories or kilocalories or kilojoules, etc., etc. We can play with these units, but this is a good unit, okay, and a good way to think of specific heat. So why is specific heat important for industry purposes that might include mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and or materials science? Okay. So when you're using something like your computer, right? That thing heats up, right? Your computer heats up. What else heats up in your pocket when you're walking around sometimes? Your phone. Okay. So specific heat is really important. That processor inside your phone or that processor inside your computer, those microprocessors are the things that are heating up. If scientists or if engineers don't understand the specific heats, or if they're not familiar with how those specific heats of the materials can affect their temperatures, then the engineers might unwittingly design a device that could burn you, right, from overheating. Scholars, are we okay? We okay? So they might actually end up designing something that could overheat and burn you, or perhaps overheat and explode, right? Same goes with a car engine. The metal in a car engine does what? Get hotter or colder as a bunch of gasoline explodes inside of it and you drive the car. What happens to the car engine? Gets hotter, right? So what the engineers who design those engines have to do is figure out what the red line is. That red line is the number of revolutions per minute at which the engine is going to get so hot that the valves inside of it, the rubber valves, can burn, okay? And once that happens, you've got an internal engine damage and the engine really isn't going to work anymore. So you don't want that to happen. So what they've done now on modern cars is put in electronic regulators that shut down the acceleration process once the number of revolutions per minute get too high, okay? And so those engineers certainly have to have a good understanding of specific heat and a bunch of other important concepts to make sure that this engine can get right to the edge of its performance limit, but not past. Okay, so these are some reasons that understanding specific heat is really important in engineering, okay? You can look up some of these other terms, chemical engineering, materials science, in conjunction with specific heat if you want to do some more research. That's a really interesting thing to do. Okay, last part. How did we study specific heat? So we experimentally measured the specific heat of what? The bolt, right? We knew the specific heat of water. We took that for granted. But we experimentally measured the specific heat of bolt. And the bolt was made out of what? Okay, so what we did was experimental measurement of specific heat of carbon steel. Okay, carbon steel. That's what our bolt was made out of. So we experimentally measured the specific heat of carbon steel, okay? I don't need an of there. Oh, experimental measurement of specific heat of carbon steel. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, either way. So we experimentally measured the specific heat of carbon steel. That was our method for studying specific heat. All right. Now I'm going to erase the board, and I'm going to scroll down to the discussion section. So if I'm going a little fast for you, don't worry. I'll end up uploading all of this to YouTube shortly. You can also copy from a friend or a seatmate, a group mate who's keeping up. So last piece, discussion section. So what can you conclude about the specific heat of a bolt? Okay? So this one, what you have to do is, what can you conclude? Your result. Okay? So like X cal per gram degrees Celsius. Okay? Whatever you measured is what X is. That's what you can conclude from your work. Why do you think your experimental value differed from the accepted value? So reference your percent error calculation. So this is where this is attribution of error is what this is formally called, this sort of objective here. And what we're doing is we're asking ourselves why our experimental value wasn't exactly the same as the accepted value. So what went wrong, or what wasn't ideal in our experimental setup? What happened? And there were two different things, right? So why did it differ? One, rounding error. Okay? So rounding error. So the deal there is that when you used your thermometer, you probably rounded to whole degrees. But you actually have the scientific, I'll call it the scientific right, you have scientific approval, okay, to estimate to actually 0.1 degree. So your measurements could have been more accurate, okay? And we'll talk more about that as we do more physical measurement. Then the next one is part 2. Heat loss to surroundings. So some of us got specific heats of like 0.086 calorie per gram degree Celsius, which is a good bit less than 0.12 calorie per gram degree Celsius, which is the accepted value. So why do you have a smaller value than the accepted value? And the answer is that when I took the bolt out of the boiling water, right? Did I immediately dump it right into your beaker? No. What was happening to it? It was held in some tongs, and what was surrounding the bolt? Air. Is that air at boiling water temperature? No, it is certainly not at roughly 220 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? It's not there. So that boiling water is not 100 degrees, sorry, that air is not 100 degrees Celsius, so that air is not keeping the bolt nice and warm, okay? So there's some cooling that can take place. Additionally, air molecules are able to bombard the top of your water as the bolt sits in it inside of your beaker. So that's another so those can also draw heat from the beaker, okay, and from the bolt, from that system. So heat loss to the surroundings can affect your experimental result. All right, what do your results indicate about the specific heats of metals? Okay, so I want you to think again about water, right? Water has a specific heat of 1.0 cal per gram degrees Celsius, and then your specific heat of your bolt, which was made out of carbon steel, was roughly 0.12 cal per gram degrees Celsius. Okay? What's the difference between these two? Are these pretty similar, or are these pretty different? Similar or different? Is 1.0 close to 0.12? No, right? Kyra and Layla are shaking their heads. So this value here is roughly 8 times this value, okay? So this is much bigger than this. So the specific heats of metals are super low in a relative sense, okay? Metals don't like to hold on to heat. They don't like to store heat. And related to that, why do you think that metals are known as good thermal conductors? Metals do conduct heat quite well. And there are 2 reasons for this, okay? One, metals are highly dense. Metals are very dense, and they have delocalized electrons. So metals conduct heat well because of that property. In keeping with that, the metals also have low specific heat. So those 2 things are related. Okay. So I'll upload this lecture to YouTube. Okay, why? Metals are really dense. Okay, metals are super dense, and they have delocalized electrons. The electrons inside the metal, and we'll talk about electrons later, are able to just float all around the metal. Okay? They aren't stuck. The valence electrons aren't stuck to any one particular metal nucleus. So the metals are very good heat conductors because of that. They also, because of that, have low specific heats. All right. So any questions about this material? Okay. The rest of class time is yours to finish up your lab report and to work on your SLC prep. And Ms. Alcaraz and I will be coming around if anyone has questions. Good luck.